welcome to the Live and Learn podcast. Sarah and Jess, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time. I know. Both from Access Group. We're going to tackle some really tricky topics today, aren't we? Which I'm really looking forward to picking your expertise on, especially how to make compliance training fun and engaging, which I'm sure everyone listening in struggles with. Just to kick us off, could you just introduce your roles at Access Group, just for people kind of listening in and watching?
Yeah, of course. So Simon and I know each other very well. We've been working in partnership for a long time. But I'm Jess Bates and I head up our partner channel here at Access, focused exclusively on learning. So our partners in learning are people in a similar space to us, talking to customers every day about how they can embed behavioural change, how they can actually make learning stick, all those types of problems that probably L&D managers have on a regular basis. But yeah, been working in partnership quite a long time, which is great.
Yes.
And I brought Sarah along today as very much our guru.
And very well known in the industry as well, both of you. So a lot of people recognise both of you, so thank you.
And I'm Sarah Mian. I'm head of learning content and I head up what we call the Content Collective at the Access Group, which is a team of about 60 plus content creators from multiple disciplines, and we create every type of learning format from webinars to podcasts to e-learning, animation. And we also work with about 2,000 plus experts as well who help us horizon scan and appear in our media. So we have lots of experience of working with experts in learning as well.
Hopefully people listening know what video arts do, because it's our podcast. But just for people who maybe don't know, just kind of in a nutshell what Access Group do.
In really simple terms, we are business software providers, and we're a large and growing company, and cover all sorts of different business software solutions, from anything from finance software to software for the hospitality industry. Sarah and I sit in a division that is called People, and the People division covers everything that interacts with human beings or with people. So anything from HR, for example, through to recruitment, talent retention, and we sit very focused in the learning space as part of our People division.
So then I think today's topic is how to make compliance training engaging, which I'm really excited you're helping us with this, because this is something we come across all the time. It's something people struggle with. I guess the context of this stuff is, probably Sarah, your kind of background with this stuff. It's the context, the stigma, why it's always tick box or kind of boring. Maybe people struggle with this, don't they? It's something that is really, we hear most days.
Yeah, they really do. And I actually have made compliance training for a very long time, and I genuinely don't think it's boring, although it can be. I acknowledge that there's a lot of e-learning, compliance e-learning out there, which is very boring. I think the problem is that you've got two different personas. So you've got your compliance officer who really has to demonstrate that the organisation is compliant, and so they are beating people with a stick to get this compliance training completed. Yeah. But then you've got your end users, your learners, who just do not want to sit through the tedium of another boring piece of compliance e-learning. And kind of worst case scenario there is that you've got an L&D team who everybody hates because they keep chasing people to do compliance training. But you've actually got learners who are just trying to get through it, and they are not engaged, they're not taking anything in, and they're not changing their behaviour. They're actually not being compliant. And it doesn't need to be like that, because if we can actually make it engaging, then you're solving both problems. That you are going to have learners who actually know how to be compliant, they care about being compliant, and you've got compliance officers that can demonstrate that they are being compliant.
I was thinking about this as well, and I was thinking, well, I think one of the scenarios that probably plays out quite strongly in compliance is there's a lot of information for people to take in. Certainly if you think about things like information security or cyber security or health and safety, and you want them to retain all the facts. So I think maybe one of the things, and you can align to this, Sarah, is that people think that they have to put loads and loads and loads of stuff in this content that makes it very long. And then again, that's a massive barrier, because people are going, well, I can't spend 2 hours sitting through a really long compliance learning course. And I think there's this misconception that because it's compliance, it has to be really detailed and really heavy going. Yeah. But that's not necessarily the case, right?
No, and actually less is more. And you know, we have this that we call the KISS principle, which is keep it short and simple.
Nice.
If you Google that, it actually says something else, but we mean keep it short and simple. And that's actually because you need to give your brain an opportunity to process information. When you're talking about learning and the neuroscience of learning, you have lots of competing information coming in, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to get it from your limited working memory capacity and encode it into your long-term memory. And the best way to do that is to keep it short and simple and give your brain lots of opportunities to process the information. So you are far better just getting a few facts over that stick with the person than going into reams and reams of detail about theory and principles. It is literally going into the ether if you do that.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not actually resonating in people's heads because you're just sending lots of information, but none of it is actually, using the words you used earlier, sticking.
Absolutely.
It's not embedding any kind of behavioural change, as you said.
And what about timing? Because I think our customers always say often it'll be the way it's given. So compliance training might be when you join a company, you've got 2 weeks to complete these 5 courses. You're already worrying about, meeting your manager, your team, your colleagues. Or sometimes they might have a financial year or calendar year and they leave it till the last week before Christmas and send an email around, everyone has to do this course, you've got a week to do it. That's probably part of the problem as well, isn't it, in terms of the kind of putting it in windows sometimes, and people then think, oh, I've got to do this compliance training, and they kind of keep putting it off. Has you got any tips around maybe on timing or context with this stuff as well?
Yeah, I was thinking about this as well today around the kind of accessibility piece, or in terms of the making it available when people are actually available to do it. And we sort of look quite a lot at mobile first as a strategy, don't we, in terms of how we develop content, so that as and when people do have the opportunity to do it, there's no kind of barriers that get in the way between them doing. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, and actually increasingly a lot of the workforce are not on desktops. If you think about certain sectors, for example, retail, hospitality, carers, they actually don't even have access to desktops. And so, again, we have this philosophy of having mobile first. We design mobile first, everything. And that is to reduce the barriers to entry. That is to make a completely frictionless environment so people can just do compliance training when they can, when they have a moment, when, as part of their role. And so I think a mobile first philosophy is a really good way to support people doing the training, in the flow of work.
Yes, going back to your theory, the KISS theory, we won't Google that. We'll be careful if we do. But in terms of just breaking that down for people, so if we've got some e-learning designers looking in, especially with your expertise as well, you're managing that team, is there a rough kind of, I know it's hard because obviously compliance, there's a massive range of courses depending on sectors and so on. Some rough tips in terms of length, mix of media, obviously video we use very well, you guys do as well, there's a synergy there. Yeah. What would like a good typical course look like, or access group? You've got some principles when you roll something out, the kind of e-learning template guidelines that people could maybe kind of tap into.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are pretty ruthless about length, I have to say. So we like to keep our titles, our courses, about 15 to 20 minutes. Fantastic. And even within that, we would always chunk it up into little bite-sized pieces. So we're always trying to balance kind of the dopamine of something novel and new to keep people engaged, but also the safety and security of someone always having a framework to work within. So we use a lot of like the signalling principles, so someone knows exactly how far they are along the course, what's coming up next, what they can anticipate. And then we would use a lot of multimedia, and we use Mayer's multimedia principles, which talks about using 2 channels, because both your audio channel and your visual channel, because when you use 2 senses together, it actually boosts one. And so that's why we like to use multimedia. Video is great for that. And we would make sure that there is, even our video, we're quite ruthless about timing. So I don't know what your lengths are for video, but we would say no more than 2 minutes. Agreed, because actually you can show, the statistics show that the longer you go on a visit in a video, the engagement just drops and drops and drops. So what's the point?
It's just waste.
You are wasting everybody's time by going on longer than that.
And you can see that in how we interact with video just in our personal lives as well. If you're on social media and you see a video, if it's 2 minutes, you're like, yeah, I can sit and do that. That's long in that context. I can fit that in. But if you see something that's longer than that, you kind of put off, and it's that kind of scrolling thing, isn't it? You'll move on to the next thing really, really quickly. And I mean, the other thing I was thinking around the use of video that I think actually we connect very closely on with video arts is this kind of the impact of storytelling.
Yes.
I know you do that very, very much in the video arts content, and I've seen it in the content you've created and when I've sat in on it. But that's something that you talk very, very passionately about as well, is trying to connect somebody to the learning you're doing, and storytelling being a great way of doing that.
Yeah, and again, neuroscience backs us up on this, because what stories give you is a nice framework to hook in novel concepts and to make people curious, and also they create emotions. And
Absolutely.
if you don't, Nick Shackleton-Jones always says, if you don't feel it, you don't see it. And I really believe that. If something doesn't emotionally resonate with you, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So stories are a really great way to evoke emotions.
And what would your advice be on mandated versus non-mandated training? That's always something people want to get the balance right. We've always talked about content being, we've not got a lot of time here, 15-minute chunks. You don't want to send people 20 courses to do. What would your tips be on how much to mandate and how not to mandate?
I ran this by some of the colleagues internally, and again, I think the approach they took, and I'll be corrected on this, but is less is more. I think if people see so much mandated training, it's off-putting. And if you think about what we talked about at the outset, is this focus on outcomes. I think if people see things that are overwhelming, they just shy away from it and they don't want to do it at all. Whereas if you can actually make it inviting, it doesn't feel overwhelming to complete that mandated training, you're much more likely to get people going there in the first place, which again, if you can get them there in the first place, you're more likely to deliver the outcomes you're looking to drive. It's not just a tick box exercise. It really should be. If you're looking at what the business is trying to achieve, it's not a tick box. They're actually trying to keep people safe. They're trying to keep their employees, their information safe. That's what they're trying to do. And I guess the more that you can draw people towards that, and the less you can make it overwhelming and off-putting for people, the much more likely you are to sort of drive the outcomes anyway.
So we've covered mandatory training, accreditation. How important is it in this sector? So obviously there's more risks to this stuff. What's your experience of how important it is? I think a lot of your content is accredited, isn't it, with ROSPA and bodies like that?
Yeah, and we see accreditation as a really important way to give our content credibility. And so it might be subject matter expert accreditation. So, for example, our health and safety content is ROSPA accredited, and all of our content goes to ROSPA before it gets accredited so that they can check that we're covering the right topics in the right way. Similarly, our leadership training is accredited by the Institute of Leadership. So again, it's a mark of excellence to say that this genuinely supports leaders. But also you've got the industry accreditations. So, for example, our conveyancing quality scheme training is accredited by the Law Society. And what's important about that is an industry benchmark. And so for those in the legal industry, the Law Society is a highly credible organisation, and they would be looking for content accredited by them. And so we've got that industry backing as well. So for us, accreditation is a really important way to demonstrate credibility.
One thing is winning hearts and minds and getting people to understand why they need to do it, why it's important, without maybe fear-mongering, and making it fun still. What's your kind of tips and advice on that?
I think it's so important, because if people don't feel like the training is relevant to them, it's all around relevance, and they don't understand what the outcome might be if they don't do it, or the impact might be, then why might they, then it's another barrier that prevents somebody from doing something. So again, health and safety is a really good example of that, because if they know that by doing certain things in a certain way, they're more likely to keep themselves safe, keep their colleagues safe, reduce the risk of injury, then they might understand why it's important. And any ideas on sort of how you can get that message across to people?
Yeah, so in learning content, I always start with the so what. The so what, and actually that's like a well-known marketing phrase, but why do I care about this? Yeah. And it's really important to get that right front end. So as an example, say we're going to do some fire safety training. Like, your first instinct on hearing that will probably be to be like roll your eyes and yawn. But if I introduced you to someone who perhaps was seriously burnt in a fire that was completely preventable, and they talk about how that's impacted their lives, suddenly you care.
Yeah, definitely.
Suddenly you care about being compliant because you can see that the impact it has of not being compliant. And so that's what we really need to do with our compliance training. We've got to really support people to understand, like, why is it important? Why should I care about this? And that's a really good hook for people to be engaged and want to change their behaviour as a result of it. I'll also give you another example of what I find what people somewhat do wrong when it comes to compliance training. People tend to go straight into the theory. So I've made many, many GDPR courses in my time, and I know GDPR very well. And for some reason, people always start with just like listing the 7 principles. Of GDPR, and I just think, why? Like, I could look at that on the internet. In fact, AI could probably scrape that together for me very easily. Totally. If you actually made that real straight away by using an example of how perhaps we're all breaking GDPR in our everyday lives,
as well and stuff like that.
There's the consequences of that. So it's like, why do I care? Because there's a huge risk to, risk personally, but also how easy it is to break GDPR. So if we've all got mobiles, and probably we've had client information on there that perhaps we haven't wiped in time. Well, we're already breaking GDPR, but so it's about bringing it to life with examples, and we would always start our training with those real life examples to make it real. You've got to make it real for people. Just the theory, you can Google that stuff. Let's just get to the practical. Let's get to the example. Let's get to the case studies.
And I think it's kind of avoiding that. A lot of e-learning suppliers will have that linear, like you said, let's start with theory first and then build on it. But you've lost people engagement-wise straight away. So go back to an example like you've already said there. In my head, I was thinking, we've got a GDPR course, but the mobile example, I was thinking, and that's straight away, I'm engaged with that. And then if you then have the risk as well, you're more likely to follow the rest of the course rather than starting off with 7 bullet points, like you said. You can just
people will switch off straight away, won't they?
And that's where the tick box stigma comes from, isn't it? People just skip it and because it's not relevant to them.
Yeah.
So start with the kind of the punchline almost rather than building up to it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
We always wrap up our podcast with the title, Live and Learn. I think, Jess, you've got a good example to share about in this kind of episode on making compliance training fun or relevant, where you kind of learned the hard way or had a mistake there. Can you talk us through that one?
I can think through... we had a very specific example once for compliance training in health and safety, and it was in manual handling. And it was all about, we were very much talking about making it relevant. Now, we have got our off-the-shelf manual handling training, but the particular requirement we had was for a customer that was a prison. So moving and handling wasn't moving and handling of boxes or heavy equipment or anything like that, but they wanted to be able to personalise the learning to talk about moving and handling of prisoners because they had a particular issue with getting prisoners out of prison vans and safely into prison. But it was really important in that context that they could say, well, actually, yes, we understand the principles, but in this instance, it's people that we're moving and probably people that aren't the best behaved, perhaps.
Yes, so that's a good example of relevance is king.
Absolutely. Very, very important in that scenario.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. There's so many good tips you've shared there that I think we can all take away. So really appreciate your time and expertise, and hopefully you'll come back on soon.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.